Hello everyone and welcome to my Bachelor Nation 24 channel, I hope. Everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Facility punished Todd Chrisley with no church. Todd Chrisley did an interview from inside Pensacola prison in December last year. Basically, he backed up claims by his daughter, Savannah, about poor prison conditions. Now he's done a second interview. He mentioned being denied the right to worship in church. And he reiterated further allegations of persecution by prison staff. Todd Chrisley opened up to Brian and Tin. After the first interview with Brian and Tin on News Nation Now, Brian took some heat on social media. And some people felt he'd just committed career suicide. Well, that never happened. After all, it's not like Savannah's dad is a major criminal with a chain of serial killings or physical abuse in his past. Similar to Joe and Teresa Judas and Jen Shaw, Todd Chrisley went to prison for fraud and tax-related crime. So he's a white-collar prisoner. Therefore, he's nothing special. But his message holds some weight on the way the inmates are treated. Bear in mind that Pensacola is not a medium or high-security prison. It's a low-security camp. And yet, a whistleblower who backs up claims of poor conditions alleges a heavy-handed warden. Chrisley knows best prison leaks. Via the whistleblower, and from his first interview, the former patriarch of Chrisley knows best alleged a poor diet, errors in the health department, and dangerous mold. Recently, the news arrived that allegedly Jewish prisoners were denied things that they needed for worship. Additionally, there was talk of violence used by the guards. The latest interview, which you can watch further down in this article, covered allegations that the facility has no dental hygienist and no doctor. Allegedly, someone suffered a heart attack and an inmate who is a doctor had to see to his stabilization. Todd Chrisley talked about how word got out about the new interview with Brian and Tin, so he couldn't attend church. How do the interviews happen? Prisoners don't have access to smartphones, so he claimed that the prison guards thought he had sneaked in a phone. However, the previous interview was recorded while speaking to his lawyer. Therefore, searching the chapel for a phone or other contraband seemed pointless to Todd, and they missed their church service. According to News Nation Now, some allegations against the former Chrisley Knows Best star seem serious considering he's a white-collar inmate. Todd Chrisley has a chance of release. The former star has the grounds for his appeal, and it went incredibly far. Did you know that oral arguments are rarely granted? But his case will be heard on April 19, and not on a mere technicality either. One thing that fans of the old show believe is that even if he gets to go home, Todd will keep on fighting for prison reform. Todd Chrisley had always leaned on faith like it was oxygen. From his gilded Nashville mansion to the cold, fluorescent lights of a prison chapel, he clung to scripture, prayer, and the hope of redemption. But nothing could prepare him for what happened in the spring of 2025 inside the walls of FPC Pensacola, where a quiet punishment, far crueler than solitary confinement, took hold. He was banned from attending church. It started subtly. One Sunday morning, Todd stood in line outside the modest beige chapel at the edge of the compound, his Bible tucked under his arm, suit coat pressed to perfection like always. He wore the same hopeful expression he had during his television sermons on Chrisley Knows Best, only now it was tinged with desperation. Church had become his sanctuary, his one escape from the monotony, judgment, and the bitter taste of regret. But that morning, an officer in a brown uniform with mirrored sunglasses and a clipboard called out Todd's name. "Chrisley, you're not on the list." Todd blinked. "There must be a mistake. I've attended every week since I got here." The guard shrugged. "Take it up with the chaplain. You're not going in today." Confused and humiliated, Todd turned back toward the yard, unsure whether to pace, pray, or scream. Something felt off. At first, he assumed it was clerical. Maybe someone mixed up his name, or he missed a sign-up sheet. But then happened again, and again, Sunday after Sunday, his name mysteriously vanished from the approved list. Meanwhile, other inmates, some of whom Todd had invited to church, were allowed in freely. A few weeks later, word began spreading among the inmates. "They're freezing you out, Chrisley," whispered a bunkmate. "They think you're too much of a showoat. The guards say you turn worship into a performance." Todd was stunned. Yes, he quoted scripture with flair. Yes, he sometimes led hymns with a little more volume than necessary. But this? Denied access to God's house for
The heartbreak
being
was
too
real.
enthusiastic. Todd had spent hours counseling fellow inmates in the yard, using parables and Bible verses to lift their spirits. He'd organized impromptu prayer circles. His faith wasn't just performative, it was his identity, his lifeline. But behind closed doors, facility officials weren't amused. One staff report described Todd as manipulative, attention-seeking, and prone to treating religious services as platforms for self-aggrandizement. Another claimed his presence caused disruption and drew focus away from worship and toward himself. Still, rather than confront him directly, the facility took the quiet route. Blacklist him from the one thing that mattered most. And because church services were considered a privilege rather than a right, there was no formal grievance process. No appeal. To Todd, it felt like psychological warfare. He wrote letters to the chaplain, the warden, even to outside pastors he had known back in Tennessee. But the responses were vague, diplomatic, and maddeningly indifferent. One chaplain simply replied, "Sometimes God calls us to worship in the wilderness." That wilderness grew colder each week. His cell grew smaller. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder. Even conversations with fellow inmates grew tense. Some mocked his fall from grace. Others feared associating with him might put their own privileges at risk. Desperate, Todd began holding secret sunrise services in the far end of the recreation yard. Nothing big, just a few verses, a quiet prayer, a gentle hymn. But word spread, and inmates began joining. First 5, then 10, then over 20. The guards weren't pleased. One morning, 2 officers approached and broke up the gathering, warning everyone that unauthorized religious meetings were considered organizing, a prison infraction. That night, Todd sat alone on his bunk, thumbing through his well-worn Bible. He stopped at Job 13:15. "Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him." The irony wasn't lost on him. He wasn't Job, but he certainly felt abandoned. Then came the worst blow. A letter arrived from Julie. "They cut back services here too," she wrote from Kentucky. "But at least I'm still allowed to attend. I heard from Savannah that the prison board might be trying to make an example out of you, to show the public you're not a saint." Public image. That was always the undercurrent. Todd had built his brand on morality, manners, and immaculate Southern charm. But the prison didn't care about fame. In fact, they resented it. And his presence in church, where reporters had once speculated he might lead post-prison ministry, felt like a threat to their control. Todd realized something terrifying. They didn't want his faith extinguished. They wanted it contained. But Todd wasn't one to go quietly. He began writing a memoir, longhand, in the margins of old devotional books and scrap paper. He titled it Faith Without a Sanctuary. In it, he detailed the emotional toll of spiritual punishment. Not physical abuse, not solitary, but exile from the very thing that gave him peace. By summer, rumors of his treatment reached advocacy groups for religious freedom. One attorney even offered to send a legal inquiry on Todd's behalf, arguing that consistent, targeted exclusion from religious services bordered on religious discrimination. And just like that, one Sunday morning in July, Todd's name was mysteriously back on the list. He stood in line outside the chapel, trembling, barely able to breathe. When the guard waved him in, he stepped through the doors with tears in his eyes. The sanctuary was just as small and humble as he remembered, but it felt like stepping into heaven itself. As he sat in the back row, clutching his Bible like a lifeline, he whispered a single word: "Thank you." He didn't need to lead the hymns. He didn't need to preach. Just being in that room again, under that steeple was enough. But Todd knew something had shifted. Faith in prison wasn't just about praying in peace. It was about standing tall when even worship became a battleground. And for Todd Chrisley, that battle was far from over.